At our daughter's graduation brunch, he stood up, raised his glass and said, "I've decided to leave you." That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just a cold, rehearsed line delivered in front of 50 guests, including our closest friends, his parents and our daughter Emily, who still had her graduation cap on. I remember the sound of silverware dropping, the silence, the way Kristin, his assistant, shifted uncomfortably at the far table, pretending not to exist. I remember Emily's face paling, her eyes darting between the two of us like she couldn't believe what she just heard. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at him, smiled gently and said, "Thank you for your honesty." We had been married for 27 years. I met Mark during law school. He was charming, ambitious, full of vision. I had plans too, big ones. But when Emily was born, I chose stability. I passed on offers, stayed home longer than planned and supported Mark as he built his career. I handled our home, our daughter, our finances, everything behind the scenes. I told myself we were a team, that my sacrifices mattered. But things changed. Slowly, then all at once. He started travelling more. Late nights, last-minute conferences, vague explanations. I chalked it up to stress, until I noticed his distance wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Conversations got shorter, affection disappeared, and then the subtle cruelty set in. Once I shared an idea for a non-profit legal clinic I wanted to start. He smiled and said, "That sounds cute, but you've been out of the game too long." When I lost my mother, he flew to a conference instead of attending the funeral. When Emily got accepted into college with honours, he told her, "Good, now your mum can finally stop obsessing over you." I swallowed it all. For Emily, for peace. But 3 months before that brunch, I noticed small withdrawals from our joint account. Then I saw messages, dinners, hotels, plans to move in together. Her name was always there, Kristin, her laugh, her dreams, her new life, with my husband. Still, I didn't confront him, because I wasn't ready to fight. Not yet. He thought I was blind, that I was fragile, predictable. But what he didn't know was, while he was rehearsing his grand exit, I was already planning my quiet return. It wasn't just the announcement at brunch. That was only the final act in a much longer, colder performance. In the weeks leading up to it, Mark had grown bolder. Disrespect no longer hid behind sarcasm or subtle digs. It became intentional, strategic, a performance for others to see. He stopped pretending. He would openly take phone calls from Kristin in front of me, offering vague excuses like work stuff, even as he smiled at her voice. He started coming home late again, but this time without apologies. When I asked about his plans, he said, "Why do you care? We're not exactly newlyweds." And when I reminded him about Emily's graduation schedule, he shrugged and said, "It's her day, not mine. You handle it." Once, I left dinner on the stove for him. He came home, took one look and said, "Still can't figure out seasoning, huh?" He didn't even sit down. Then there was the money. Small transfers at first, then larger ones, always just under the threshold that would trigger account alerts. But I noticed. I always noticed. I'd been managing our finances for years. It wasn't just disrespect, it was theft. Strategic, calculated, meant to drain slowly, quietly. And then, one night, I heard him on the phone in his office. He didn't even bother closing the door. I stood just outside, out of view. "We'll move in right after Emily's brunch. She won't cause a scene, trust me. She'll be too humiliated to say anything. She's predictable like that." London at Bridget 11. That word, predictable. It echoed in my chest long after the call ended. I sat in the dark, in the hallway, staring at nothing for a long time. I didn't cry. Not that night. I just sat there in silence, feeling the weight of all the years, all the dinners, all the excuses I'd made for him, all the birthdays I'd planned alone, all the times I told Emily her father was just busy because I thought protecting his image meant protecting her. I went to bed late. Mark was already asleep. I stared at the ceiling, and in that moment, something shifted. Not rage, not even sadness, just clarity. It was over, but not in the way he thought. The next morning, I got up early and made coffee like I always did. I packed his lunch, kissed him on the cheek, smiled as he walked out the door, and then I sat at the dining table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the prenup. 27 years ago, I had more money than him. My father insisted on the agreement. Mark had been insulted but agreed, mostly to secure my father's trust fund backing for his first business. And because I was young and foolishly in love, I hadn't taken it seriously. I barely remembered the details, but I remembered enough. I called a friend from law school, now a family attorney in Columbia, and asked for a favour. I want to review a prenuptial agreement, and I want to understand the legal weight of a fidelity clause in South Carolina. He met me 2 days later. We went over every line of the document. It was airtight, the clause was still valid, and the protections in it were stronger than I ever expected. That night, I bought a small portable recorder. In South Carolina, only one person has to consent to being recorded. That person was me. I started documenting everything. Phone calls, late-night conversations, even a slip-up during a heated exchange when Mark, half drunk, laughed and said, "You'd be lost without me. You'd have nothing, no one." I smiled and nodded. He was already giving me what I needed. Next came the finances. I began downloading statements, screenshotting transfers, collecting a paper trail. He thought I didn't look at our accounts anymore. That was his mistake. When I found the lease application for a new apartment in both his and Kristin's names, I printed it and tucked it away. He never noticed. He thought I was fading, retreating, diminished, but I wasn't. I was building. I met with my attorney once a week. We filed paperwork quietly. We scheduled court dates. We moved my name off accounts he thought he could touch. We froze lines of credit. We secured Emily's college fund. Separately, legally, permanently. On the outside, I was docile. I smiled when he dismissed me. I apologized when he rolled his eyes. I even let him believe he had the upper hand, that I was too tired to fight, too worn down to push back. He started acting more arrogant. He left his iPad unlocked. I read his messages. He left receipts in his pockets. I photographed them. He whispered to Kristin over the phone in the next room. I recorded him. The night before Emily's graduation brunch, I packed a cream-coloured envelope. Inside it were copies of the court filing, the prenup, documentation of financial fraud, and transcripts of key conversations. I placed the envelope in my purse, laid out my nicest dress, and went to bed beside him, like everything was fine. He thought he had broken me. What he didn't know was I was just getting started. I handed him the envelope just as he raised his glass. He hadn't even finished the words, "I'm leaving you," when I slipped it onto the table beside his plate. Cream-coloured, unassuming, but inside it held every piece of evidence I'd spent months preparing. He didn't open it right away, not in front of the guests. He laughed nervously, tried to move on with his announcement, but I had already stood up, kissed Emily on the cheek, and quietly excused myself. Outside, I could hear the restaurant door fly open behind me. "Rachel, what the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the envelope like it had personally insulted him. "What have you done?" I didn't answer. I got in my car and drove home. Our home. The house he had promised Kristin. The house I had already secured under the terms of our prenup and my attorney's careful filings. The divorce papers had been filed 2 days before. My attorney had requested a temporary financial freeze, and the judge had approved it within hours. Our joint accounts were locked, the retirement funds untouchable. The beach condo in Isle of Palms that he had secretly put a deposit on, that deal was now on hold, thanks to a flagged credit inquiry he hadn't even noticed yet. He thought he was the one setting the timeline, that he could deliver his little speech, make his clean break, and move into a new life with Kristin the next day. But the truth was, by the time he lifted that glass, everything was already in motion. That afternoon, I forwarded a series of documents to my attorney, screenshots of the bank transfers, transcripts of our conversations, receipts, emails. One by one, we filed motions. By dinner time, Mark's phone had started blowing up. Kristin called first, panicked, confused. She had tried to move into their new apartment, only to find out the lease hadn't been processed. The leasing agent had called me, thinking I was still the co-applicant. I had politely declined, citing marital restructuring. She was furious. Rightly so. Then came the messages from his sister, from Emily, from old colleagues and mutual friends who had been at the brunch. The fallout was fast and loud. He showed up at the house that evening, furious. "You blindsided me," he said. "You ruined my life." "No," I replied calmly. "You ruined it. I just put it on paper." He paced the living room, shouting threats he couldn't back up. "You can't just take everything. You don't have the right." "But I do," I said, holding up the prenup, "and so does the law. You might want to read it this time." He stopped talking after that, sat down heavily on the couch, rubbed his face like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. I sat across from him, calm, steady. He asked if we could work something out, said he didn't mean to hurt anyone, tried to position himself as a confused man in a midlife crisis. "I thought you'd understand," he whispered. "I do understand," I said. "That's why I'm not yelling. I'm just done." Over the next week, he unravelled quickly. Kristin cut ties. Our friends, most of whom had long suspected something, stopped returning his calls. Emily refused to speak to him, and the legal process moved forward with surgical precision. At the preliminary hearing, he came with a young, inexperienced attorney, cheap and unprepared. I came with Philip, sharp and thorough. The judge reviewed our prenup in silence. Then she looked at Mark's attorney and said, "This document is enforceable. Your client's violation of the fidelity clause is well documented. Unless you have reason to dispute the authenticity of this evidence, I see no reason not to uphold the agreement." Mark leaned forward, whispered urgently. The attorney cleared his throat. "We don't dispute." And that was that. The judge signed off on the terms. I kept the house, the majority of our savings, my name clear, and my head held high. He kept his car, his personal account, and a stack of legal bills. As we walked out of the courtroom, he caught up to me in the hallway. "Rachel," he said, "is this really how you want it to end?" I turned to face him. "This isn't how I wanted it to end, but this is how you chose for it to end. I just finished what you started." He didn't have a response. 3 weeks later, I moved my things into a small office downtown and registered the name. Thompson Legal Transitions. It started with a few referrals. Women in the middle of painful divorces, lost in the legal language, too overwhelmed to think clearly. I knew how that felt. I knew what it meant to be blindsided. Helping them made everything sharper, lighter. Emily came by one afternoon with coffee. She walked round the space, touching the walls, smiling. "Dad told me you'd never recover," she said, "that you weren't built for it." "He said a lot of things," I replied, "most of them wrong. And he had been wrong. About everything. I wasn't weak. I wasn't predictable. I wasn't broken. Now I was free, clear-eyed, anchored, no longer someone's support system, but someone's example. I never returned his calls. When the divorce was finalized, I didn't throw a party. I didn't make a scene. I took a walk that evening along the river, let the breeze hit my face, and allowed myself a quiet moment of peace. For the first time in years, I felt still. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. 6 months after the final hearing, I moved into a quiet office space above a bookstore on East Bay Street. It was small. 2 rooms, 1 desk, and a second-hand coffee maker that hissed every morning like it had something to say. But it was mine, every inch of it. The door had my name on it, Rachel Transitions. Underneath, a line in smaller print, helping women reclaim their ground. I didn't need to advertise much. Word spread. One woman told another. Divorce attorneys started referring clients who didn't know how to read their own settlement papers. Financial advisors sent women who had never managed a checkbook. They came in scared, tired, foggy. And I sat with them, calmly, like someone once should have sat with me. It wasn't just rebuilding. I was becoming. Emily visited every other weekend. She'd bring pastries and stories from her first job in Atlanta. She was thriving, confident. And she looked at me differently now, not just as her mother, but as someone who chose to stand, not collapse. I think it gave her courage. Maybe that's the best gift I've ever given her. I still passed by the old house sometimes. The garden was overgrown. A new couple had moved in. A retired dentist and his wife who painted birds. They kept the shutters but changed the colour of the front door. It used to be navy. Now it's red. Mark moved into a condo downtown. We haven't spoken since the papers were finalised. Kristin vanished from his life almost as quickly as she arrived. A friend told me she now works in real estate out in Greenville. I don't care enough to confirm it. And that's the point. I don't care anymore. Not in the bitter, burning way, just nothing. I don't wonder what he's doing. I don't replay the past. I've emptied him out of my mind like old clutter that once felt too heavy to move. Some mornings, I walk to the pier with a cup of coffee and no phone. Just the salt air, the sound of water, and a strange kind of quiet that I never had in all those years of walking on eggshells. This peace. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't arrive like a marching band. It settles in slowly, like sunlight through a window you forgot was there. I learned something during all of this. Never confuse silence with surrender. And never mistake a steady woman for a weak one. Because sometimes the ones who say nothing are the ones who've already won. I don't share my story with every client. Only when they ask, only when I see that look in their eyes, that flicker of, how will I survive this? And I say, you will, not right away, but you will. Because I did. I survived the shock, the betrayal, the slow erosion of self. I let go of a life that had long since stopped holding me, and in return, I found something better. Not revenge, not even justice, just myself. The version of me that doesn't apologize for taking space, that doesn't shrink to keep peace, that doesn't wait for permission. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, alone but not lonely, steady, whole, I wouldn't have believed them. But healing doesn't arrive in a single moment. It's 1,000 small decisions, made quietly, stubbornly, every day. And I made them. To every woman who's ever been made to feel disposable, you are not. To anyone who's ever been told, you'll never make it without me, you will. And to those who think kindness equals weakness, you're exactly why we get stronger. I no longer hate him. I no longer love him. He's just something I used to survive. And today, I smiled. Not because he lost, but because I found myself.